We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 4th of June 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. This is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
2025년 6월 4일 대통령 이재명.
South Korea swings left as liberal Lee Jae-mung claims victory. We take the political pulse and get some street-level texture from Seoul. In Rome, Macron and Meloni meet to bury barbs and build a bold new alliance. Can this unlikely duo find common ground before the big global summits? We'll flip through the morning's papers, and then Vilnius is having a moment. It's now the Baltic's biggest and boldest capital. We'll find out more. Taiwan blocks Chinese pilgrims in a wholly diplomatic face-off. What does it mean for cross-strait relations? In Damascus, Syria's long-dormant stock exchange flickers back to life. What's driving the return to trading? Plus,
anything natural addresses those aspects of a personality, or let's say a being, which has a life of its own.
We head to Hyde Park in London, where the new Serpentine Pavilion mixes light, spirit and radical simplicity. And we round things off with a global arts and culture wrap. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. A US-backed aid group has suspended operations in Gaza after 27 civilians were killed nearby as the UN prepares to vote on a ceasefire resolution. Chinese President Xi Jinping met with President Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus in Beijing today as the two look to further deepen strategic ties and cooperation. And Elon Musk has torched Donald Trump's sweeping tax and spend bill, calling it a disgusting abomination and fueling Republican pushback in the Senate. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now we begin in Seoul, where South Korea's political reset is now complete. Liberal candidate Lee Jae-mung has been officially sworn in as president following a decisive win in yesterday's snap election. His victory brings to a close a chaotic 6-month stretch triggered by the impeachment of former President Yoon Suk-yeol after his failed bid to impose martial law. Lee took 49.24% of the vote, defeating Conservative rival Kim Moon-soo on 41.15%, with the New Reform Party's Lee Jun-suk trailing at 8.34%. Well, I'm joined now by Jae-up S. Kwak, Monocle's contributor in Seoul, and Robert E. Kelly, Professor of Political Science at Busan National University. Jae-up, you've been at polling stations and watching this up close. What stood out most about how this election played out on the ground?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I think it has been relatively muted, given, which has been a bit of a surprise given how chaotic the last 6 months have been for us in Korea after the impeachment of Yoon Suk-yeol. And I think this morning, local time, when Lee Jae-myung was sworn into office and effectively kicking off his 5-year term, it has also been a bit of a muted excitement for most people because, as you mentioned, his closest rival from the Conservative Party won surprisingly lots of votes at 41%. I think a lot of people are quite surprised by how well he's performed, given that the party is the one of the former and impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol.
So Robert, I mean, Lee Jae-mung clinched just under half of the vote. What does that tell us about the public mood? What do you see as the core reasons for his win, given that he is a kind of continuate party candidate?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway, as was just said, is that the right did so well despite a conservative president 6 months ago arguably trying to overthrow the Constitution, right? I mean, it's not entirely clear if the martial law was going to lead to a full-on authoritarian coup or something like that, but it looked pretty close, and despite that, the right still managed to do pretty well. The two right-wing candidates together got around 48% of the vote, which is remarkably high. I think you would have thought there would be a big wave election going to the left, as there was, for example, after Richard Nixon resigned because of Watergate. That didn't happen here. And what that tells me, the big takeaway to my mind then is that South Korea is really polarized. Yeah. That even after something as dramatic as an impeachment, conservative voters are unwilling to cross the ideological divide. And that tells me, I hope, that Lee Jae-myung will govern with some caution, because a lot of the country really is opposed to him and were willing to vote against him, even though there had been something like a putsch back in December.
Yeah. And Jae-up, I wonder if there was any kind of role played by anger over Yule's failed martial law bid.
Yes, it's really fascinating how the initial anger has really subsided, and it didn't play a huge part in the three presidential debates in the last few weeks leading up to the election either. Of course, there was enough remaining anger for Lee Jae-myung to win. But currently, 170 seats out of the 300 in National Assembly are taken up by the Lee Jae-myung's party, which gives them absolute legislative power, and they can pass laws without consulting with other parties either. So we'll really have to see how Lee navigates this delicate balance in the public opinion, because he, at this moment, can pass any laws he would like.
And Robert, what was Lee's main policy message? What's he actually promising to deliver?
He actually, I think, played this pretty well. I think he avoided sort of wading too deeply into very specific issues here. We have a general sense, because he's from the left, of what he'll probably do, right? Sort of social democratic stuff like, the welfare state. And of course, he'll reach out to North Korea. That's probably the most polarizing thing, is that South Korean progressives pursue détente with North Korea, which activates conservative resistance here. But I think the big thing that he kind of ran on was democracy, democratic consolidation, democratic protection, right? That the two Korean conservative presidents in a row now, there was another Korean president a couple years back who got impeached also, right? So you had two Korean conservative presidents in a row who have been impeached, which is a pretty terrible record, right? And that I think was the core of the argument here, right? That you should trust us because Korean conservatives can't be trusted with the office anymore. And there's something to that argument, which again is why I'm kind of amazed that the conservatives still managed to pull off such a large vote haul, because they really need to rethink how they approach the office.
And Jae, how are people in Seoul reacting today, not just politically but emotionally? Is there a sense of relief, or perhaps excitement, or even division?
Yeah, so I think everyone is relieved. Yeah, if there's one thing that everyone can agree on, is certainly relief that we can finally move on from this impeachment saga that's lasted since last December. It was the coup attempt was such a shock to a country that has scars of military dictatorship, that I think everyone can agree that we are nervously looking forward to this next 5 years.
And Robert, let's talk about the economy. So South Korea is navigating US tariffs like everyone else, and erratic global trade. How might Lee approach these external pressures?
Yeah, so Korea's fundamentals are actually pretty solid. A lot of things like unemployment, inflation, debt load, stuff like that. Korea's actually in pretty good shape on that. And there was, until Trump came in, there was actually a reasonably well set up U.S.-Korea trade agreement. Trump has sort of thrown that all out the window, as is his wont. And so I think that's really the big question. I think you're right. I mean, he's got to find a way to sort of figure out what the Trump people want. I'm not sure the Trump people know themselves. I would imagine that there will be some kind of summit right now that we have a president in South Korea, again, sort of fully legitimized with proper election behind him. I would imagine there'll be a trip to Washington or something at some point in the next 6 months. And this is going to be the big thing that will be brought up. That, and of course, security, right? North Korea is always in the background. But South Korea is a net exporter. U.S. is its biggest market. China's number 2. And so the Koreans are going to want some kind of predictability from the Trump people. I just don't know if the Trump people can deliver. I mean, I'm not sure how much Lee can do to nail down Trump because everybody else is trying to do the same thing, without much success. So I'm not sure he can do it.
I mean, Jae, how worried are the citizens of Korea about what's coming out of the U.S.?
Who can say, right, what's coming out of the U.S. because there's just so little predictability and stability at the moment in terms of policymaking. And I must also add to what Robert was saying that Lee's key advisors on the economy and diplomacy are actually former negotiators of free trade agreements with the U.S. Including in the first Trump administration talks as well. So clearly, this is the number one priority for Lee Jae-mung, and if he is unable to navigate this well, or at least not have enough popular support on this issue, then I think that's going to bode very poorly for the next 5 years.
Yeah. And Robert, finally, I mean, obviously the economy, but what should we be watching in Lee's first 100 days?
First, I think constitutional reform has really hovered over this election a lot. There may be some push on that. There's a perception that the South Korean presidency is too powerful. I think that's correct. And there's sort of this idea that maybe if South Korea moves from its current system of 1 term of 5 years to the U.S. system of 2 terms for 4 years each, somehow that will sort of make the presidency less formidable. I would actually argue that what Lee really ought to do is try to, again, like I said, reach out to the right and sort of look for some conciliatory stuff to kind of keep South Korean conservatives on board, right? So that this polarization that you really saw in the vote doesn't continue. I mean, Korea's really, it's almost kind of like 2 countries, especially on really divisive issues like North Korea. And I hope that Lee reaches out and tries to bridge that gap. His predecessor obviously failed at that.
Robert, thank you very much indeed. That's Robert E. Kelly, Professor of Political Science at Pusan National University. And we also heard from Jae-up S. Kwak, a regular Monocle contributor based in Seoul. This is The Globalist. 12 minutes past 8 in Rome, 7:12 here in London. French President Emmanuel Macron has been in Rome for talks with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. It's his first bilateral visit since she came to power and comes at a critical moment for European unity as leaders prepare for upcoming NATO and G7 summits and attempt to navigate both the war in Ukraine and a looming trade showdown with Donald Trump. I'm joined now by Amy Kasman, Rome correspondent for the Financial Times. Amy, many thanks for coming on the show. Could you set the scene for us? How significant was this visit by Macron to Rome?
I think it's important to understand that Giorgia Meloni and Emmanuel Macron have actually had very difficult, turbulent and strained relations ever since Giorgia Meloni came to power in late 2022. They come from opposite ends of the ideological spectrum. Giorgia Meloni comes from a far-right party. Emmanuel Macron is at the other end of that spectrum. And I think there was a lot of mutual antipathy between the two of them, which has flared over the nearly 3 years since she came to power. At the same time, France and Italy have a lot of common interests at a very difficult time for Europe in the world, with Donald Trump looking like he wants to cut ties with Ukraine, possibly stop supporting, the Ukrainian resistance to Russia. There's a looming trade war with huge tariffs threatened on European goods, and a lot of pressure also on NATO, with NATO members to under pressure from Trump to raise defense spending. So the context is tense, their relations have been fraught, and I think this was a meeting that was attempted to try to reset the personal relationship for them, which in a sense has sometimes seemed to get in the way of closer cooperation and working together on these very sticky issues confronting Europe.
Well, let's have a deeper look at some of those key issues. On Ukraine, Macron's pushed a coalition of the willing. Meloni's been more cautious. Did they find common ground?
Look, the two leaders spent 3 hours together yesterday. They first had talks, then they had a dinner. They did not make any public appearance. They issued a joint statement. The joint statement, in a sense, is fairly anodyne, no specifics. They both reiterated their deep commitment to support for Ukraine, but without really giving any details. The problem for Giorgia Meloni is that Macron, the idea of the coalition of the willing, which has been promoted by Macron and also the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, which sort of posits this idea of, European countries that are willing to go in and work together to maybe put troops on the ground and military support to Ukraine, or guarantors of some kind of peace treaty. That's very, very tricky for Giorgia Meloni politically at home. Italians are deeply opposed to the idea of sending any troops to Ukraine. They're also opposed to enhanced military spending. So some of these conversations about the coalition of the willing have seemed to put Giorgia Meloni in a kind of awkward spot. And I think they both wanted to reiterate their support and, discuss issues, but they didn't necessarily come out with any specific details of what they find agreement on or how something might work.
And on trade, how concerned are both countries about Trump's tariff moves? I mean, is there a sense of urgency to show unity before the G7?
There is absolutely a shared strong concern between France and Italy. Both of them are major exporters to the United States. And in fact, France and Italy did work together in some sense. They managed to persuade the EU to remove some alcoholic products from a list of retaliatory tariffs that the EU was threatening to put on the US. Europe was threatening high retaliatory tariffs on, U.S. whiskey, and the alcoholic beverages industry, the wine and spirits industries of France and Italy were both concerned that a move like this would result in even higher tariffs on European wine exports. So they did work together, I think, to get that off a list of threatened retaliatory tariffs. So there is a lot of common concern and common ground. Giorgia Meloni has repeatedly said, we must avoid an escalatory trade war that will just not help and make things worse off. So I think there is a desire to closely coordinate on responses. Of course, negotiations with the US are actually handled by Brussels. So it's a matter of France and Italy working together to lobby Brussels in how Brussels handles the negotiations with the EU, with the US.
And is this visit likely to calm nerves in Brussels, or is it more symbolic than substantial?
I mean, I think that both leaders do realize that the kind of personal antipathy between them, which has been on display on numerous occasions, is really not helpful or constructive to Europe, and at a time when Europe is trying to look for solidarity and find common ground and try to figure out how to handle this sort of wild card that is Donald Trump. And Giorgia Meloni herself has come under criticism at home for letting her personal feelings, maybe towards Macron, and her personal dislike of him come in the way of, her job as representing Italy in Europe. So hopefully they will have been able to kind of smooth things down, maybe clear the air a bit, find common ground, and find a way to work forward. Their relationship really has been a roller coaster. In a very initial meeting, Macron and Meloni, very soon after, within a week of Meloni taking office, had a very positive and constructive meeting. But then there have been all kinds of missteps. So I think it's hard to rule out that there would not be flare-ups or renewed turbulence. It has been a bit of a roller coaster, but hopefully we'll enter a new phase where they will be able to work together again, France and Italy, and find common ground and be a bit more sensitive to each other's needs and a little more mutual understanding, so that it kind of benefits all of Europe.
And finally, what's the mood in Rome around all of this? Are Italians paying much attention? What's the press coverage been like?
I mean, I think that, as I said, there has been a feeling that Giorgia Meloni's personal relationship with Macron has been an impediment to her working in Europe. There is a quite strong anti-French sentiment in Italy, especially among a lot of elites. There does tend to be a bit of a knee-jerk anti-French sentiment. So I think this meeting has been watched very closely.
Amy, thank you very much indeed. That's Amy Kasman, Rome correspondent for the Financial Times. Now, still to come on the programme.
And despite being founded more than 700 years ago, it remains vibrant and youthful in spirit, a shining example of reinvention.
We'll take you to Vilnius. This is The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS House View, you get the big picture in bite-sized articles, delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts, all focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals. UBS, banking is our craft.
This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. It's 7:20 here in London. I'm Georgina Godwin and we'll continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Steve Crawshaw, author, journalist and formerly Human Rights Watch UK director. Steve, I want to ask you how you are, but I know exactly because we spent most of the last weekend together.
Exactly. So just been at Hay Book Festival where you were, as always, one of the queens of the festival, and I had my book on justice, which I was talking about there. What a great place that is for book lovers.
It really is. I mean, that green room atmosphere and the amount of people that you have the opportunity to interact with is extraordinary, isn't it?
But also just the enthusiasm of such crowds. I mean, it's sometimes called the kind of literary Glastonbury. It really is so many different tents and so many people getting just excited about books. It's it's an amazing mood.
Tell me about your new book.
So, Prosecuting the Powerful. It's called War Crimes and the Battle for Justice. And, I started writing it a couple of years ago. The themes seemed pretty relevant then, but they've got, of course, more and more relevant in the meantime. So it's about the amazing people who've made change, made it more possible to prosecute war crimes over the many, many years and decades. But also those governments which really don't want that to happen and think the idea of balancing justice out is not a good idea. So it's a kind of, there's lots that's happening in a positive sense, but of course there's lots of challenges as well.
Fascinating. We'll have to get you in to meet the writers to talk about that. Steve, let's move on to Trump tariffs.
Well, this is a kind of ongoing saga, isn't it? And it really doesn't get any simpler as it goes on. I mean, listeners will be aware of this rumbling on. So the latest bit on this is announcing that 50% steel and aluminium tariffs will begin on 4th of June, in other words, today. And that was kind of confirmed yesterday. At the same time, the British government is rejoicing and jumping up and down and saying, yay, we haven't got 50%, we've only got 25%, so we are the privileged ones. But actually, that isn't confirmed. One of my takeaways, and separately to that, another element of the story is a Californian court being various challenges to the tariffs have been temporarily knocked back, but only temporarily. One of my takeaways from all this story that goes on the whole time is that Trump constantly describes this as though he's kind of going to bring some strength and confidence to the American economy, and always going to be so simple that people will start making things there and everything will be marvellous for America. And, of course, what's partly happened, there's so many zigs and so many zags, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. The idea that business people will be going, oh, great, America's going to be an interesting place to invest in the future is frankly for the birds, because nothing that's there for the moment. So the Financial Times, the headline on it is Donald Trump orders the 50% tariffs to begin. But within that is lots of concerns at different points of saying all of this is in legal limbo, basically. None of it really means anything. And it's as though Trump thinks that by merely making loud noises, everything will work out, and it isn't that way. And it's but everyone else having to dance around him a little bit. It's a very strange situation.
Absolutely. I wonder if you've been watching these memes and this kind of joke that's coming up in the media all of the time about Trump calling him the taco president.
Yes, I love that, yes.
Trump always chickens out.
Yes, and the fact that he was so furious when a journalist asked him that question, he goes, that's a very nasty question. And it's so, we kind of laugh at it because it's so absurdly childish, and yet here's the guy who is in his way still, you know, in the most powerful position in the world on these things. And it's incredible to have somebody who it has so little understanding. And there's lots of other things as well. I mean, where he does, it's worrying, his own determinedness. But lots of the times it's as though he has no understanding of the implications of his own actions. I think that's really, really difficult to work out where to go.
Absolutely. Let's go to Gaza now. So these appalling killings near the US-Israeli-backed Gaza aid site. Tell us more.
Yeah, so this is one of a series of headlines, again, in a dark way. This can get really confusing because this is now the third day in succession. There have been different reports, different killings gathering at the food site. So the food site, the background to all this, well, of course, first of all, is the appalling assault that's been going on following the 7th of October attacks and those deadly crimes at that time. Then we've had all this time of the assault and the starvation, which has been called out at the UN and elsewhere. Today's headlines are, for example, the front page headline in The Guardian, Israeli fire kills 27 Palestinians waiting for food. And that follows similar headlines in recent days. And basically people are getting up pretty much in the middle of the night. It's like 4 a.m. and you watch, and then the website tells you go to this particular place and you need to get there. And so they are starving, as the UN has confirmed. They are desperate to get there, and then loads of people are killed. So what is then even more disturbing on top of the killings is that we're seeing again and again that the Israelis are denying what has happened and saying we're not responsible, but they're not really giving any plausible alternative of what has happened, which is the same as we saw in recent months, for example, when 15 paramedics and rescue workers were killed. They came up with one kind of completely nonsensical story that was contradicted when video came out, and then they backed off, and then they say, oh, we'll look into it, it's complicated. So on the one hand we have this story which is so much darkness, but also bizarre for me and picked up in some of the British press, for example the Daily Mail, Daily Telegraph, is Donald Trump criticises the BBC for Gaza aid misreporting, as the White House accuses the broadcaster of interpreting the word of Hamas as the total truth. That's a Daily Mail headline picking up on Caroline Leavitt, the Trump spokesperson, who, when asked about the killings, instead of really answering about the killings and whether they're worried or not, the UN, for example, has said it was unconscionable and, expressed various concerns. Instead of that, Trump's spokesperson goes on this wild attack on the BBC, who in fact had done some very, very careful reporting where they really tried to BBC Verify, which really goes into every detail. But Trump and his people don't really seem interested in getting to the bottom of the truth. What they really want to do is just kind of flail out and attack other people.
And take over Gaza.
Sorry?
And take over Gaza.
And take over Gaza. Again, it's kind of, that's an unthinkable thing that's kind of not going to happen, where he talked about the Riviera of the Middle East. But as a number of Israeli papers and liberals have pointed out, what he has done, this is a quote from the Israeli commentary, he has fueled the genocidal energy with those kind of statements. And that's what we saw after that. We saw the far-right people within Netanyahu's cabinet, Netanyahu himself, saying, we will kick everybody out. That's not a verbatim quote, but in effect it is a verbatim quote from what they've said. Quite extraordinary. Ethnic cleansing publicly declared. Yeah. Really remarkable.
Steve, you have many areas of expertise, but Poland is one in particular. What's the Guardian editorial on the country saying?
Yeah, apologies for... You're quite right. I'm kind of obsessed with Poland, which I lived in years ago and still visit a lot. And apologies for smuggling this one in, because the elections were on Sunday night, presidential elections, and I know that Monocle quite rightly has covered that. It's actually in the British media, it's had, I think, far too little attention. So what we had for a long time the Law and Justice Party, I was going to say far-right party, which kind of is, but a Trumpish conservative party, lost to the centre-right coalition of Donald Tusk, formerly head of the European Commission. That was there from a couple of years now. But in the meantime, the presidential elections, which were very, very close. So we had Nawrocki, the Law and Justice, the right-wing candidate, just got through on the second round of those elections against Trzaskowski, the liberal presidential candidate. Now, this can all seem terribly obscure, but what this in effect does is completely hobble the existing Polish government. So Tusk has now had to call for a vote of confidence, or he's likely to call for a vote of confidence, which raises lots of other problems as well. So The Guardian has an editorial on that today. Their headline in the print edition is, "In Poland, a boost for the right as illiberalism finds a new presidential voice." The online headline is something like "Poland first, but Europe last," which I think sums it up actually really well, because this is about much more. We may not be interested in every individual European country and what's happening exactly there, but this is of importance for all of Europe. Most obviously, it's incredibly important for Ukraine. And I really worry, and many liberal Poles deeply worry, that this rightward turn, this Trumpish turn, because Nawrocki, the new president, is absolutely best mate of Trump, who explicitly supported him before the election. I think it's very, very worrying for, to be honest, stability more generally in Europe. You've got people with a Trumpian mindset now in the presidential chair in Poland and in Hungary, of course, and elsewhere.
Yeah, I think you need to cheer us up a little bit. So tell us about Kampala and Hollywood.
I was cheered up by this. There's just such a lovely story in so many ways. Found in translation is the headline to this one in The Guardian. Hollywood films given voice by Uganda's video stars. Now, dubbing obviously is a big thing in many different countries, and sometimes you get, some of that can be quite comic and strange and confusing in its own way. But I love this, that in Uganda, apparently in East Africa, you have the video jockeys who basically, the kind of translation that they do of the English language films which are popular are not just translation, but they kind of make it up a bit as they go along. And the audience know that they're doing this, and they adjust it, and they adjust the characters, and people just love it. And some people, or even those who can speak the original language prefer the energy and the vibe and the pizzazz, if you like, that comes. So they portrait one particular video jockey and the stuff that he's doing. He's been doing it for quite a few years, and this is an absolutely huge deal. So one of the quotes from one of the shops selling it is, "These titles are already available in their original English versions, but people don't watch them. They're waiting for VJ Junior's translation." And I also love the detail that the idea of doing this, it began, it turns out, from the colonial era, when evangelists would give somebody next to them a microphone to translate their Christian videos for the local people. And so that always used to happen. So God's word, as it were, was translated, presumably more or less accurately on that stuff, but it's kind of vibed from that into this I'd love to be present for that. It sounds just wonderful. Yeah.
Steve, thank you very much indeed. That's Steve Crawshaw, author, journalist and formerly Human Rights Watch UK director. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. In Gaza, a US-backed aid group has halted operations after an Israeli strike killed 27 people nearby. The UN Security Council will vote on a resolution demanding a ceasefire and full humanitarian access. Chinese President Xi Jinping met with President Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus in Beijing today, as the two all-weather partners look to further deepen strategic ties and cooperation. Lukashenko's visit to Beijing was his first to the Chinese capital since he was declared a winner of a presidential election in January, extending his 31-year rule of the former Soviet Republic. And Elon Musk has slammed Donald Trump's massive tax and spending bill as a disgusting abomination. His rebuke is stirring up resistance in the Senate, where fiscal hawks may now block the bill's path. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now, for a closer look behind the headlines. Vilnius has been named as the Baltic's biggest and wealthiest city. Here's Monocle's Sonia Zuravlyova's take, read by Monocle writer Julia Lassica.
For For close neighbours, the Baltic states work hard to oust each other as the most attractive proposition for businesses and talent. But Vilnius is coming out on top. Not only has the capital of Lithuania just become the most populous city in the Baltics, overtaking Riga, but it is also now the wealthiest. Its GDP per capita is now 5% above the EU average, outpacing Estonia's Tallinn, a long-standing landing pad for many tech startups. To attract both foreign workers and locals, Vilnius has invested in green spaces and good public transport, earning the European Green Capital accolade for 2025, while its drinking and dining scene is also booming. According to the city's mayor, Valdis Benkunskas, Vilnius is experiencing remarkable momentum and thriving like never before. And despite being founded more than 700 years ago, it remains vibrant and youthful in spirit, a shining example of reinvention. But Tallinn is not taking the news lying down. It is drafting a new city master plan that will boost its education offering, public transport, and green spaces. The race for the most enticing Baltic bolt hole is on.
That piece by Monocle's Sonia Zuravlyova was read by Monocle writer Julia Lassica. And for more from Monocle's editors and correspondents around the world, do sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. Taiwan has denied entry to several Chinese nationals hoping to join a major religious event, the Bashai Mazu pilgrimage, citing concerns the visits are more political than devotional. Officials say it's part of a wider push to counter China's so-called United Front influence campaigns, soft power tactics used to sway hearts, minds and sometimes policy. This comes on the heels of US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth calling China an imminent threat at the Shangri-La dialogue, sharpening the already brittle cross-strait mood. Well, joining me now is William Yang, senior analyst in Northeast Asia at the International Crisis Group. William, many thanks for joining us once again. What exactly is Taiwan trying to prevent here? Is this really about religion or is it a broader political firewall?
So this is definitely part of the government's effort to strengthen Taiwan's ability to counter what you just described, the Chinese influence and also infiltration campaigns. This particular announcement and move made by the Taiwan government came on the heel of a series of other 17 in total measures that the president introduced in March that was basically sparked by a series of very serious Chinese espionage cases, which the presidential office and also our former foreign minister were also targets of that particular espionage case. And the government really now felt like it is necessary and for them to actually either implement existing laws more strictly and thoroughly, and at the same time trying to work with the legislature to pass new laws that will ensure that China can no longer take advantage of Taiwan's open democratic society as a way for them to achieve their goal of dividing Taiwan's civil society and at the same time spreading propaganda that will be viewed as undermining Taiwan's current government, but at the same time convincing more and more people in Taiwan that the consideration of unification with China, in fact, is not as dire and gloomy as some of the political forces in Taiwan are portraying.
I wonder if you could give us more detail of the concept of United Front, what it is and why Taiwan finds it so threatening.
So United Front is this Chinese government department that has been tapped to conduct influence and also infiltration campaigns for decades. And it has been described by both President Xi Jinping and past Chinese leaders as a magic wand for China to reach some of its policy goals. Basically is by, through the long-term infiltration and interaction with a the target country or target destination's civil society, they can help to influence and shape the public opinion in that particular country on a specific issue related to China, and eventually hoping to turn the public opinion around, and by doing that also achieving the ultimate goal of influencing certain policies or weakening the political system of a adversary in this particular regard. And Taiwan has been the prime destination and target of China's United Front influence campaign because Taiwan shares the same language as China, and the cross-strait interaction has always just been so frequent and so in-depth to the extent that it is a very easy place and also a very ideal place for China to carry out all different kinds of United Front campaigns.
Now, Pete Hegseth's imminent threat comment at Shangri-La caused ripples. How does that shift the tone regionally?
I think that speech actually was received at least quite positively by certain countries in the Indo-Pacific region, especially those that have long-standing treaty relationship with the United States. So Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, and Australia, New Zealand, these are countries that definitely probably breathe a sigh of relief after hearing the message and also the details and the vision that was laid out by Hegseth during that speech. Because for the first few months of the Trump administration, the countries across the region really felt like they are not getting enough clarity about how exactly the second Trump administration is going to handle the existing relationship with them, and with China become growingly more and more ambitious and also aggressive in the region. They are concerned that if the U.S. Does not continue at the same level of the relationship, they could potentially face more pressure and also more aggression coming from China. But I think at the same time, because countries in Southeast Asia are facing such a high level of potential tariff that Trump has threatened to impose on them. So the message of asking countries across the region to enhance their defense budget significantly, and essentially also choosing between the U.S. and China, that message is not going to, I think, dwell or at least rest that well with the Southeast Asian countries, because these are countries that still economically rely heavily on China. But at the same time, they also don't want to completely lose that security relationship with the U.S. So I think going forward, the U.S. government will continue to face some challenges when it comes to engaging with certain countries in the Indo-Pacific region.
William, thank you very much indeed. That's William Yang, Senior Analyst, Northeast Asia at International Crisis Group. This is Monocle Radio. Syria's stock exchange is back in business. After a 6-month closure ahead of Bashar al-Assad's ousting, the Damascus Securities Exchange has reopened, now rebranded as a private, digitally focused hub for economic recovery. The move comes as the US, EU and UK lift key sanctions, raising hopes of foreign investment and a long-awaited economic rebuild. But how much of this signals real change, and what does it mean for Syrians on the ground? Hannah Lucinda Smith is Monocle's Istanbul correspondent, and she joins us on the line now. Hannah, good morning to you. How significant is the reopening of the Damascus Securities Exchange, both symbolically and practically?
Good morning. Yeah, as you say, there's symbolism here and there's practical benefits as well. Of course, you know, the reopening of the stock exchange, but also the reopening of it as a private company and as a stock exchange that's looking to attract foreign investment. That's a huge turnaround from the era of Bashar al-Assad and also his father Hafez before him, not just in the war era, but even before that. Syria was an incredibly closed economy. It was very, very hard for investors, particularly Western investors, to enter that market. And what the new government is signaling here is a complete turnaround. They're looking for investment as the finance minister said, both from their neighbourhood, particularly from countries like Turkey and Qatar, who are already investing heavily into the new Syria, but also from overseas companies as well. And it's no coincidence that this reopening has come just a few weeks after, as you mentioned, the lifting of those sanctions by the US and the EU. The UK also has lifted many of its sanctions. It's really a signal that Syria, this new Syria, is open for business to the entire world.
Syria's finance minister's promising a digital-first, investor-friendly economy. Do you think that's realistic given the current infrastructure?
Yeah, of course, the infrastructure is one of the major problems. When I was in Syria in February, there was grid electricity of about 2 hours in Damascus. Clearly, that is less than ideal for, investors who want to set up things like factories or anything really. The sanctions and the damage to the infrastructure were really causing huge amounts of problems, both in daily life and also, for people who wanted to set up businesses. You couldn't do things like, download the latest versions of software, even the most basic things. So that really is going to be a huge thing, particularly when it comes to, as the finance minister says, encouraging digital development. I think the one thing that we should say about, the opportunities that Syria offers, and the one advantage it does have, is a really young, very educated population, many of whom have spent a really long time abroad learning as refugees, but learning second languages, learning the cultures of different countries, making links and contacts in those countries. And many of those young people want to come back and contribute to the redevelopment of Syria. So I think, while there are challenges, there are also, huge, human capital that Syria can draw on.
And finally, how are Syria's neighbours watching this? Could a stabilised Syria bring wider regional economic benefits?
Absolutely. I mean, Syria for many, many years has been really a problem for its neighbours, both in terms of security, in terms of, looking after the millions of refugees who went abroad. But now a strong Syria really offers opportunities, particularly to countries like Turkey. Turkey has been a really consistent backer of the opposition to Assad. It's now become the new government. Already Turkish companies are pouring into Syria for things like construction. We've seen Turkish companies already investing in the redevelopment of the energy infrastructure. But also, obviously Jordan and Lebanon as well. These are not rich countries by any means, and having a stable neighbour is going to be of advantage to them as well.
Hannah, thank you very much indeed. That was Hannah Lucinda Smith, Monocle's Istanbul correspondent. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
There's a craft to every question, which is why at UBS, we query every aspect of the market, working with specialised experts and award-winning research teams, covering over 3,500 stocks in 50 countries, all delivered in a comprehensive library, answering what you want with what you need. UBS, banking is our craft.
London's renowned Serpentine Pavilion will open to the public later this week. The temporary structure, which is built every summer in the city's Hyde Park, is often used as a conceptual testing ground for the selected architect. And for this year, the 25th anniversary of the annual commission, that's Marina Tabassum. The Bangladeshi Architects Pavilion is titled A Capsule in Time and features 4 sculptural wooden forms with a translucent facade which diffuses light, casting a gentle, dappled glow throughout the interior. To find out more about the project and her practice more broadly, Monocle's design editor Nick Manise spoke to Marina and began by asking about her design.
For the Serpentine, it's a pavilion at the end, there for a very certain period of time. In a way, it relieves you of that responsibility of a building which shapes people's lives, let's say. It's a place where people come together to have a nice time for different occasions, for different activities. And the idea is you take away nice memories, you take away being in a nice space, and then at one point this building will vanish in a way. So that temporality is also an important part of it. But at the same time, it will have its life to some extent in the virtual realm. I do work a lot with geometry and very pure geometric form. So the building has that, what I call like a half capsule. So that formal approach is about geometry, and at the same time trying to use material which I can find here. We've never built with wood because wood is not a material for us in Bangladesh. Because of our tropical climate, people try to stay away from wood as much as possible. There's only a very few sections of the country where they use wood as a structural member, but otherwise you don't see much of wood being used. So this is a new material for me in that sense, that it's a wooden building structure which is sourced here. We're trying to find whatever material is there. So that was one issue for us. And at the same time, we try to create this openness. It's a very archaic form, but at the same time, it's very open. So to embrace the location of the park and how the park actually enters into the space, it's solid, but at the same time, it's very porous. Those are issues I also try to address in our architecture, that how you blur the edge of the boundary between in and out, so that in is out and out is in. So all those aspects are pretty much there.
So there are some kind of principles that stretch across your work. Even if you look at the mosque that you worked on, you see light filtering into the space. I mean, I see some of your residences. There's also light and natural light inherent to that. Why are these enduring themes that come up again and again for you? And how does that link back to building a better world?
Light gives atmosphere. Light is a very important element, and that's why I try to use light in every possible way. In the mosque, you see light brings the sense of spirituality in that space. And light actually captures the spirit of the place and the space also. I'm always drawn to use light, especially daylight, in any possible way I can. Most of our projects will address daylight and ventilation. In our pavilion also, light plays an important role. We wanted an ethereal atmosphere into the space. That's why we were looking into translucent material. So the wood gives it a structure, but there is this facade which are translucent. We were initially thinking of jute as a material, but then jute doesn't have the right kind of fire rating that's needed to be placed so close to a very important gallery and also in the garden. So we had to source something which is local, and also we are using polycarb with a sort of a film on it that gives you that translucent light. And I think that is playing out quite beautifully.
Why is honouring spirit of place important to you? Why should we care about that?
I think architecture to me is that you come here, you experience it, and it's something that should touch you to the core. It should create a certain kind of a dialogue between the visitor or the person who's inhabiting this space. And I think that if you have that spirit of place, and I think that's very important because many buildings don't have that. And to be able to capture that spirit, which actually gives it a certain kind of personality, and that personality actually speaks to you. When you're able to create that, it stays with you. For me, it's very important that my buildings are a being rather than being a very static, lifeless object. So that's why I think bringing in light, bringing in anything natural addresses those aspects of a personality, or let's say a being which has a life of its own.
You talked about putting people at the center of your work and that being really important. How does this link to that?
The way we designed the pavilion, it's a very archaic form, as I was saying. You see a vaulted structure with a half-dome shapes, which is trying to create this place where you would come and you would spend time. I want people to come and sit there to be able to enjoy that space. People from all different backgrounds coming together and just celebrating humanity in a way. That's the plan for me.
So then how does Shamayana tents come into this?
When we thought about this whole typology of pavilion, I looked into my own background, and especially where I come from, in the Indian subcontinent, let's say. Shamiyanas have been used from the Mughal time or even before that. So these are structures made out of either bamboo as a structure and then made of fabric entirely. So it's fabric creating these very kinetic structures built to hold gatherings underneath it. When we were young, most of the weddings or even religious gatherings were used to take place under the shamianas. And I have memory of these beautiful light coming through these very colorful fabric. And that's something stayed with me. I thought if it's a pavilion and if I have to bring in my own background, that light really stayed with me. How can you interpret that light in London in a way? So that's how it sort of connected.
You mentioned the pavilion again there and the fact that this is temporary. But what legacy do you hope this project leaves? What do you hope people maybe take away when they visit it?
There is this tree in the middle, which also represents life. It represents nature to some extent. There are seating all around the pavilion. There are lots of seats. You can just sit there and enjoy the day going by, and then the light coming through the space, filtering through these panels. It has a life of its own. If you just sit there and try to enjoy and take it in, and I think that would be wonderful.
Bangladeshi architect Marina Tabassum there, speaking to Monocle's design editor Nick Moniz. London's Serpentine Pavilion will open to the public in Hyde Park on Friday, the 6th of June. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Well, I'm joined in the studio now by Amma Rose Abrams, a London-based arts journalist. And Amma Rose, many thanks for coming in. You were actually at the Serpentine opening last night.
Yes, I was there and I experienced the pavilion, which is really beautiful. I mean, the panels, the translucent panels that cover the structure, this modular, big kind of structure. It's one of the largest pavilions that I've been in at the Serpentine. They just change with the light. They are these kind of brown, green, almost sometimes golden colours that really change with the light and will apparently change as the trees change colour and the landscape changes throughout the year. It's very beautiful.
It sounds amazing. And you were talking about it from a practical point of view as well.
Yes, this is going to hold a lot of people. And it's also got a modular element to it. There's a central section to it and the two ends. And so you could have like an orchestral performance at either end. And then you have this central panel which moves, providing shelter as and when you would like it according to whatever function they're going to have happening. So you could fit a lot of people in there and in a way that really kind of works and is practical and comfortable.
Yeah, and is covered, essentially.
Yes. Yes, we are living in England and it was very cold last night.
Yeah. Listen, it's London Gallery weekend.
Yes, it's come round again. Really exciting. And it builds momentum every year, and every year since it started, I think it's like 4 years ago, it kind of gets bigger and bigger. And now, as it's established on the art calendar, we have much bigger names taking part. For those who don't know, it's central London, South London and East London, stretching out to about kind of Old Street City Road. And it's major galleries opening up their spaces, doing performances, shows, book sales and things like that. And some people stage massive exhibitions for Gallery Weekend. And it's basically the art world saying, come in, these galleries are free to enter and we are kind of staging things for you this weekend. It's really, really fun.
And anyone in particular that, or any few that we should definitely put on our to-visit list?
To-visit list, for Derek Jarman fans, there is a great show of his black paintings at Amanda Wilkinson. And there's Joe Bradley, that's happening at David's Werner. Cornelia Parker has a show that's at Frith Street Gallery. I love her work. It's always worth popping down and seeing her. Harley Weir has something at the Hannah Barry Gallery. And there's a really interesting show of a Indigenous Australian artist, Emily Cam Kangwari, which is going to be at Pace Gallery in central London. There is a show of her work opening at Tate in July, Tate Modern. So it's like a precursor to that. So that's quite exciting.
Excellent. We've only got a minute left, but you just have to tell me as briefly as you can about the world's favourite banana.
Oh, yes, the art world banana. So it's Maurizio Catalan's comedian has been given by crypto entrepreneur Justin Sun to the newly freed Ross Ulbricht. who, for those who don't know, founded the Silk Road, kind of a slightly dodgy online sales platform.
And who was just pardoned by Trump. He was meant to be in prison for the rest of his life.
He was, and Justin Sun has also had charges dropped against him.
Yeah.
And so I think there was this quite performative exchange of the banana, which Sun pointed out, as you have to renew the banana constantly, is a decentralised fruit.
And then he ate it.
He did eat it.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Emma Rose, thank you very much indeed. Emma Rose is a London-based arts journalist. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Monica Lillis, Hassan Anderson and Ryuma Takahashi in Tokyo. Our researcher, Francesca Gilks, and our studio manager, Flynn Simons. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and the briefing is live at midday in London. I'm Georgina Godwin, and I will return on The Globalist at the same time tomorrow. Thank you for listening.